I also love to coordinate and work on events that bring extraordinary people to you and your school. And today we have an incredible opportunity to get to know a living legend and a national hero. And I think while I'm not going to spend a long time giving any type of introduction to Admiral Lawrence Chambers, I think the idea that we in our midst have one of the first African Americans to command an aircraft carrier, which that aircraft carrier based here, USS Midway, is one of the most visited museums in the nation. And so Admiral Chambers has a history with that. And I think if you really start to reflect on our current news and our current situation, you can't turn on the news without hearing things about Afghanistan and our troops there. There was a recent tragedy. I think then it really starts to sink in. It really starts to sink in how important our military and our military heroes are. And so without further ado, and now that we've got the presentation set up, I'd like to introduce you to Admiral Lawrence Chambers. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm not used to wearing a mask, and it's unfortunate that we're having to wear them today. I'm glad to be here in California. The last time I was here, when I first got out of the Naval Academy, you're not going to believe it. Your parents weren't even born. I was last here in 1954, and I was stationed over at North Island. My wife, Sarah, and I, we're really pleased to be here today. We want to thank Dr. Moore for inviting us to meet you and to see this impressive facility. Man, I can't believe what high school looks like today. You're going to see a picture of mine before this slide's over, and it doesn't look anything like this cool campus. I bet you're saying, here we go again, some old guy coming in here and telling us how it used to be, well, not quite 100 years ago, but damn near. Why should we have to listen to him? And that really is a fair question. And here's my answer. A long time ago, when I was sitting in high school, I was wondering what the hell it was I wanted to be, or where I wanted to be. All of the naysayers were around telling me, come play, be cool. And I went out for football. I made one tackle, the coach called me over and said, look here, boy, you're not big enough to play golf. Go back to the golf team and the track team where you belong. And I was disappointed because all the cute girls wanted to go out with the football players. So I guess, folks, I've been a nerd all my life. But anyway, I did a few things in life, and some of them may be helpful to you. Dr. Moore was very nice to invite me to come here, and I'm pleased to be here this morning. First, I want to thank Midway Museum for sponsoring our trip to San Diego, and that's really why we're here today. When I was a kid in the South, there was something called segregation. White kids, black kids did not go to the same school, or eat in the same restaurants, or go to the same doctors. You would think it was really weird. And in fact, it was really weird, but that's how it was. My life didn't get off to a good start. My dad died when I was 5 years old. And you see that little guy in the picture, that was me at 5, and we went to live with Grandma and Grandpa. A few years later, we all moved to Washington, D.C., And when I was old enough, I went to Dunbar High School. And there's a picture, guys. Take a look around and see what you've got and see where we were in the inner city. The important message here is don't let peer pressure bring you down. You have to find a way to get along in this world and to get along with other kids. I pretended that I didn't like to study, but I was studying my head off. And I was working to do the right thing. When it came time to go to college, I was offered some small scholarships. We were poor, we didn't have the money. I had two brothers younger than me, and they wanted to go to college too. And I looked around, and somebody said to me, well, if you go to one of the service academies, they pay you to go to school. And I thought that was a great idea. And I got a congressman to nominate me. He had to be nominated to even take the exam. I took the exam. There were 29 of us taking it. I was the 29th alternate, and I was the only kid that passed the exam, so I got the appointment. In those days, it was pretty tough. I called my buddy, and he gave me some directions on how easy it is to get into the service academies today. And I have some information that we'll leave with your school that explains how to do it. And so if any of you are interested, it's a free ride. You have to do a little service when you graduate. And there's some cool things to do when you get out of the service. When I went to the academy, I was the second African American to show up. And you might say it wasn't easy. In fact, it was pretty tough. But let's look at it this way. I was a poor kid from 7th and T, which was a tough neighborhood in Washington, D.C. I went to the Naval Academy, and I graduated in 1952. Man, is this a great country or what? After graduation, I was a naval officer. And I went to my first ship. And there were a number of us young junior officers reporting aboard at the same time. We had routine things and assignments to do. And I noticed that a couple of us were doing a little extra. And we were standing bridge watches when we didn't have to. And I wanted to be an aviator. But I know that when you grow up, airplanes land and take off on ships. So you gotta know airplanes and you gotta know ships. So I worked on knowing both. I stood bridge watches whenever I could. I know it doesn't sound like much, but the people in charge take note of the men and women who go the extra mile to do the extra things. And so you've got to invest in it, and your reward is you progress. In 1953, I took my love for aviation from making model airplanes to flying real ones. And after pilot training in June of 1954, I had one of the proudest moments of my life. I received my Navy wings ago. But right now, I'm going to shift to talk a little bit and talk just a little bit about Afghanistan. It's in the news. It's in the news everywhere. And about a week ago, a reporter called me. Yeah, me, a 92-year-old, and the guy was asking me what I thought about the situation. He asked me to compare the evacuation of Kabul with another evacuation that I'm very familiar with, and that's the evacuation of Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. He knew how old I am, and he just wanted to listen, so maybe you guys might listen a little bit too. Once upon a time, I was captain of that museum piece that you see down in the harbor. And my wife says, you know you're old when the ship you commanded is a museum piece. but she's not cutting me any slack. This morning I'm going to talk about those heroic days at the end of the Vietnam War, and I will compare what we did with what I know about the evacuation that's going on in Kabul in Afghanistan right now. And going back in time a little bit, once we knew we were going to withdraw from Vietnam, we had planned for an evacuation of Saigon. At that time, it was the capital of South Vietnam. The city has now been renamed to Ho Chi Minh City. But those old timers still remember it as Saigon. It was a nice place. Food was great. The French had been there for 100 years. And so you had a lot of great restaurants. People were wonderful. But this position shows where the Navy ships were when we were preparing for the evacuation. And you notice the ones that might be a little hard to see, but the ones in the color were the two big ships. Midway was the largest ship out there. It needed the deepest water. So most of the time we were about 100 nautical miles off of Saigon. And in comparison, right now, if you look at Afghanistan, there isn't an ocean within many hundreds of miles. And this is what the deck looked like when the first helicopters full of refugees landed on Midway's flight deck. And if any of you have been tourists on the museum, you'll notice that there is a really tough, non-scared coating on the flight deck. It's great for braking action on the airplanes. Real tough on hands and knees if you happen to slip and fall. And when you've got hundreds of people getting out of those turning propeller blades, flight deck's a really dangerous place. And there were old women, young women, old men, young men. There were babes in arms and young kids. And my fear was that we were going to have an accident and it was really going to be miserable. As it turns out, except for a few skinned knees and hands, we were very lucky. Chaos is putting it mildly. There were many, many people coming aboard that were armed. My orders to the Marines, and they were authorized deadly force if necessary, was we confiscated all the weapons. Our weapons storage areas, our magazines were full, so I didn't have any place to store them, so they all went over the slide into the South China Sea. Here's a picture of the folks getting out of a Huey. And I know a lot of you are familiar. The Huey is a helicopter that's designed to carry 10 combat-ready Army or combat-ready Marines in full combat gear. And we had as many as 50 people getting out of a Huey with luggage. This little guy didn't know where he was, but he was taking it all in. And it's a nice picture, and he's a cute kid. After we fed the refugees, and the ship's medical staff checked them all out, we used our own helicopters to move as many of the people as we can to the other ships in the company. When the AH-53s landed, there were 250 people getting out of each one of those, and we had 10. So you can do the math and see that we were flooded on the flight deck with people. And we, as we say, we were medically examining them and then moving them on to the other ships in company. And if you look back in time, some of these pictures may have shown up in the magazines, but this is a picture of a fully loaded helicopter, and you can see the fight that's going on for the folks who are still trying to get on, and she's got a full load as is. And this picture appeared, I believe, in every publication in the country at the time, and everybody was thinking that this was the American embassy. It really wasn't. It was one of the CIA pickup points, and there were pickup points all over Saigon, and various helicopters were picking up people and bringing them out to the ships that were on station just off of Untitled. The most of the people came out of those big HH-53s, where we were getting a couple of hundred people on them at a time. And those helicopters were taking off from inside the embassy compound. One tree had been cut down, so there was plenty of room for those guys to land in the compound. And we rescued a lot of people, but sadly we didn't get everybody. And in the end game, when the embassy was overrun, the last couple of pickups were made off the embassy roof. On the morning of 30 April, the U.S. ambassador to South Vietnam, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Grant Barton, was one of the last people that we rescued from the embassy. And in his party was my Naval Academy roommate at that time, Captain Hugh Benton, and he was on the support staff for the ambassador. He later on became Admiral Benton. The ambassador and his wife slept in my import cabin, and I had a big dining room for a ship, and there were 8 or 10 senior officers in sleeping bags sleeping on the floor. And the refugees are still coming on board. In the middle of the chaos of day 2, this Cessna 01 Bird Dog arrived on the scene. It was obvious to me that the pilot wanted to land. I had a runway. It was totally clobbered with helicopters, but I had one. And I had an admiral on board who was not my boss at the time, but he was calling me up and my bridge up and telling me, tell him to ditch, don't do it. I put myself in that pilot's shoes, and when we put our glasses on it, we could see there was a pilot, and sitting behind it looked like there was a female, and she was holding a babe in arms. There was no way under the sun that the babe in arms, and then the rest of the kids were in the baggage compartment. None of those folks were strapped in. And if that airplane tried to ditch, it was going to flip over, and everybody was going to drown. So I figured the guy in the cockpit knew this as well as I did, and if I didn't give him a place to land, I was convinced in my own mind that he was going to crash in on board. And with all those helicopters and things that you saw in one of the previous slides, that was going to be a real disaster. He made 4 or 5 attempts to drop a note. The last note he dropped, he had it wrapped in his pistol. There were no bullets in it. And it landed, it hit the crash truck, and it stayed on there. Now, I didn't need his note to know what he wanted. But his note said, can you move these helicopters to the other side? I can land on your runway. I can fly 1 hour more. We have enough time to please move and rescue me. It's signed Major Bung, wife and 5 child. That's an exact quote. So don't let your English speeches come after you tell them that idiot up there can't even speak good English. Major Lee's airplane was not designed to land on an aircraft carrier. Those airplanes, unless it's an Osprey or a helicopter, designed to catch a wire, which is all the arresting gear, to come to a stop. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder what the landing speed of that airplane is, and my guess was that it's around 60 knots, about 63, 64 miles an hour. And I was calculating how much wind do I need over the deck in order for him to be able to stop on my runway. In the meantime, my runway was covered with helicopters. So, with the Admiral still yelling at me, I ordered the Air Department to make a ready deck. The gentleman in charge of the Air Department, a gentleman by the name of Vernon Jumper, he's one of the docents on Midway out there now. He said some words to me that your teachers would be appalled if I repeated them right now. But he said there was no way, you know what, and what, that I'm gonna be able to make a ready deck. I haven't got enough room to move those helicopters out of the landing area. And so I told him I was gonna give it the help. I got on the ship's general announcing system, and I asked all of the Air Department personnel and all the Air Wing personnel, these are the people that use the flight deck, and know the ropes, to come on the flight deck, to give the air boss some handling and make it a ready deck. And lo and behold, we had the regular Air Department people, but there were a number of junior aviators around whose airplanes were tied down on the flight, on the hangar deck. They couldn't fly anyway. They showed up. The medical guys showed up. The Marines showed up. We had about a 2,000-man working party to show up on deck to join in the demolition derby. We pushed a lot of helicopters over into the South China Sea. And just before we gave this young lad a signal to come aboard, 8 more Huey helicopters landed in the middle of the area that we had just cleared. The Air Boss wanted to know, Skipper, what are we going to do now? And I said, I'm going to go to jail anyway. 8 more going over the side is not going to save my you know what. So we cleared it. We didn't have radio communications with the aircraft. We gave the pilot a green light. And for those of you familiar with aviation, the green almost lamp around here in the little airplanes that don't have communications when they want to land. All the towers down. And we gave him permission, and guess what? We had 40 knots of wind over the deck. So my 300 and some, actually 600 and some feet runway was the equivalent with that much wind of about a 2,000 foot landing area. The guy was successful. The crew that was helping clear the deck, man the island in what area was we call Vulture's Road. They were all cheering and cheering when the young lad landed. After the successful landing, the crew collected over $10,000 from Major Lee and his family. Now, $10,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but when you back up to 1975, 10 grand was a lot of money. And we forwarded it on to the Lees to help them get settled in their new home in America. This is a picture of Major Lee with the executive officer of the ship taken on a flight deck. I had a chance, he came up to my bridge, I had a chance to talk to him briefly. I took off my Navy Gold wings and I pinned them on Major Lee and I made him an honorary aviator, and to my knowledge, except for a few the Tucson River test pilots, nobody ever landed on an aircraft carrier without a tailhook until the Harrier came along and the Osprey. But Major Lee had more than 8,000 hours of flight time in that airplane. He was a great pilot and was able to handle the challenges. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Dr. Moore, we're talking about Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is totally landlocked, and you'll see in the next picture. And there ain't no runways. There's a runway, the nearest runway is available, probably, my guess is I'll switch to the next chart. Islamabad is in Pakistan, and we have friendly relations, or we did have friendly relations with those. And the airport in Islamabad is about 310 nautical miles from Kabul. And to try to do a helicopter evacuation like we did in Vietnam is almost impossible. That's a long ride from Kabul to Pakistan. And so the people are getting up now on the big transports when the bad guys let us land. And back to
It's what wives do.
Can't drink it with a man. Now I presume you're all wondering what happened to Major Lee, what happened to his family, what happened to the bird dog. That event happened about 46 years ago. The airplane hangs in the museum, the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola. It hangs in the ceiling. When we got the airplane on board, my little brother was a colonel in the Army, and he was horse holder to the chief of staff of the Army. I sent Andy a note and said, hey, Andy, give permission to the chief to give that airplane to the Navy. Tell him it's in very poor material condition, and anyway, he probably doesn't want it back. So we got a nice note from the Army saying that we could have the airplane. Now, if you see that airplane hanging in the hangar in Pensacola, you'll realize that somebody lied. That airplane was in great material shape. Anyway, Andy later became a 3-star general, so I guess Grandma and Grandpa did something right. A copy of the bird dog is hanging in the Midway Museum, along with the original note that was dropped by Major Lee. That original note was hanging in my library, and I had it nicely framed, and it had a premier spot. Somebody I know ratted on me and told the Midway Museum that I had the original note. So I donated the note to the museum, but they were really nice. They sent back a museum quality copy of the note, so hanging on my wall, you can't tell it wasn't the original. And every now and then I take a look at the original and say, that's mine. Midway has got it. The Lee family lives in Orlando, Florida. This picture was taken at Sun and Fun Air Show back in 2014, where Major Lee and I were both honored for feats in aviation. Major Lee is sitting in the cockpit of a bird dog. It's not the same one. It's just an Army bird dog. And when that picture was taken, there were a number. There was 4 of the Lee's 5 kids. There were at least 5 grandkids. Mrs. Lee was there, but she wasn't in the picture because she had a bad back, and she was sitting in a chair. But key, at Sun and Fun, I learned that Mrs. Lee could not swim. There was no way under the sun that Major Lee was going to ditch that airplane. When he said he had 1 hour of fuel left, he didn't have enough fuel to make it back to the beach. So either he was going to land aboard Midway or he was going to crash aboard Midway. Those were his options. But anyway, you can see it's a wonderful family. They're all of his kids, all Major Lee's kids are professionals. One's a doctor, a couple of lawyers. The girls in the family are all professionals. And that's pretty much what I had planned to talk about. But when I was preparing to speak to you today, I saw your logo and your school song on the internet. I was pleased to see that I would be coming to a place where champions are made. And I am pleased to have addressed a group of young adults, Fly Eagles. Thank you. I'll take questions. I won't guarantee you that at my age I'll remember the answers, but I'll give it a shot.
Are there any questions from any of the audience members about what Admiral Chambers has shared with us? And while you think of one, I do have a question, Admiral. You mentioned being one of the second African Americans to go to the Naval Academy. You mentioned that there were some challenges. What kinds of challenges do you recall and remember from those times?
Well, remember, I didn't make the football team, but I was a nerd. And so the studies were not an issue at the Naval Academy. I was number one in my class in high school, so I had no problems with the academics. But the challenges were physical. In those days, there was no limit to the amount of hazing that could be done. And so I was harassed, particularly plebe year. And fortunately, Wesley Brown, who was the first of us to graduate from the academy, it was his senior year during my freshman year. And my first classman was his roommate. So I would go around to Wes and Gus's room, and so at least while I was in that room, nobody was harassing me. And plebe year was pretty tough. But youngster year, you're kind of the hidden crowd, and we had a couple more minority kids to show up in the class of 53. I was class of 52. And so they had new canon fodder to work on. But the harassment never stopped. Senior year, obviously, it wasn't that bad. But I remember B.O. Davis Jr. went to West Point. He later wound up as a three-star general in the Air Force. Nobody spoke to him for 4 years unless it was something in line of duty. And I was always thinking, no matter how bad it was for me, none of it was as bad as what they did to B.O. Davis. But look, when you're the first, there was a free education. They were paying me to go to school. They fed me. They paid for the books and all the training. So, yeah, harassment was there. But if you look at today's West Point, look at the Naval Academy, look at the Air Force Academy. By the way, the Air Force Academy didn't exist when I went to school. There are hundreds of minority kids at these institutions that are doing well, and nobody is receiving the kind of treatment that some of the first guys took. Look, every now and then you just gotta suck it up and do what it is you need to do. But the big thing is, don't give up. You are better than that. Your academics are good. Physically, you're in great shape. So don't let anybody talk you down. And there's always a group of folks around that want to goof off. They want to do other things. And it ain't popular now. It wasn't popular then, of being a nerd. I mean, that's just the way of the world. But in the end, the nerds rule the world. So don't neglect your studies. Don't neglect going out for the tough things, the things that make you tough. And yeah, I would love to have been a football player, but look at me. This body just wasn't big enough. Anyway.
Are there any questions from any students? Yes, thank you. Great.
I was just gonna ask, you didn't talk about it much, but what was your experience during the civil rights movement?
Civil rights. The question was, what's your experience during civil rights, which mid-60s?
Okay. President Truman, and that was long before your time, is a gentleman that issued, signed one of his orders that ended desegregation. That was in 1955, 56, 58, 48, okay. When you're old, you need help. Just remember that. It was in 1948 that Truman desegregated the armed forces. And that was the beginning. That was after I had arrived at the Naval Academy. And then, of course, obviously, when the Air Force Academy came along, discrimination was not an issue. And well, yeah. When I first graduated, I went to a ship, and there were 10 of us junior officers reporting aboard, and me. And all my hopes was that I was going to get off that ship as soon as possible and go to flight training and learn how to be a naval aviator. But because I was there, I figured I would get the most out of it that I could. So I volunteered for bridge watches. I did a whole bunch of things, trying to make sure that I knew as much about that vessel as any of my shipmates. And you know, if you're industrious and you're working hard, people will notice. Men and women. I was at sea. What struggle? They were beating the you-know-what out of me, and I was trying to learn how to be a... Would you come up and answer the question? They asked me. Remember? I'm 92 years old, folks. I'm just damn lucky to be here. And thanks for the question. And yes, there were civil rights issues everywhere. And you may recall that there were the riots in the District of Columbia, and they burned down planes on 14th Street and other places. There were riots in California as a result of a civil rights incident and the Watts riots. I mean, there have been issues everywhere. But the big thing, my advice to everybody is if you're smart, you do your work, you will be noticed and you'll get ahead. You just got to believe in yourself that, damn it, I'm better than they are. I can do more than they can. And of course, I was arrogant. I thought I was smarter than they were. And they were trying to beat it out of me, but you know, sometimes you survive. Next question. I'll try to answer.
Well, I have been, yeah, that was the bell. We'll be wrapping up shortly. But I do have a question based on your presentation. I just want to make sure that I heard it and maybe re-emphasize it. So you got Major Lee's distress signal that and understood that he needed to land on your aircraft carrier, the aircraft you were commanding, the Midway. And did I hear correctly that 8 helicopters got pushed over to get out of the way so you could make a space?
Oh, that was the last day. I didn't count them because I knew I was going to get court-martialed, and so I didn't watch. But we pushed 32 helicopters over the side. But I can stand here right now today and tell you, U.S. Navy was not on the side of any of those helicopters we pushed over. So they couldn't have accused me of destroying Navy property. They belonged to Air America and that CIA covert, and they belonged to the U.S. Army. They belonged to the Vietnamese Air Force, and they belonged to the U.S. Air Force. So none of them were Navy that I pushed over. And I don't have to defend it today. I think they figured if they try to drag me in, and I wouldn't live long enough to be prosecuted.
So that was getting my question. Like, did you get court-martialed? Did you get questioned about that?
I was questioned about it in the progress. There was an admiral on board who was yelling at me, telling me not to do it. I'm thinking, my grandmother's whispering in my ear saying, do the right thing, boy. Do what I told you to do. And so I'm listening to my dead grandmother telling me to do the right thing. And I figured I had two evils. He's either going to crash it on board, and then I really have a hell of a mess on hands, or I'm going to try to give him an opportunity to land on board. And one of these days, somebody's going to go around the South China Sea, and they're going to be looking for something on the bottom. And they're going to discover all of these helicopters on the bottom, and there's not a living soul anywhere near. There are no bones where the guy died, and the fish recovered the remains of it. They're just going to see a bunch of helicopters, and they're going to say, what the hell happened here? And yeah, I'm responsible.
Understood. Thank you. Ms. Chambers, thank you very much. Is there one more question here? Okay, yeah, come on. Oh, who had it? You? Okay.
How did you and your wife meet?
That's probably the best question of them all.
On an airplane from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. That's what happened. They were showing a movie, and she was sitting next to me and said, I saw that movie and it's wonderful, don't you want to see it? And I said, what's it about? She said, it's about aircraft carriers and planes flying bigger. And I said, I see that every day. Why the hell should I pay for that movie? Well, the movie came on, and I saw all my buddies. They did a cameo of all my friends, and I was watching them saying, what are they doing now? And anyway, I guess she got tired of me hitting her in the ribs.
Again, folks, what a delight to have Admiral Chambers, Mrs. Chambers, and to have this presentation for you. Can we please give Admiral Lawrence Chambers a round of applause? I want to thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience. Again, this is the kind of programming that we are working on at our district office. I'd like to also thank the Urban League. Key Hagan is a representative here from the Urban League. She and the USS Midway Museum. Veronica is representative from the USS Midway Museum. They were the ones to make sure to me so that I could bring this presentation to you, so that we could have the extraordinary opportunity to meet Admiral Lawrence Chambers and learn a little bit about history, especially as we're going through this trying time in our own current history going on right now. Again, I want to thank all of you for being such a wonderful, wonderful audience. If you have questions or think of some things that you maybe didn't get a chance to ask, there's some resources that I passed on to your principal, and they can make sure that those get to your classroom teachers, so you'll want to learn more about certainly the incident outside in Saigon, and just more about his history. But also, if you have other questions, please feel free to contact me, and we can make sure we get those questions to the Admiral if you think of them later. I'm sure there's a way that I'm supposed to dismiss folks. So we'll, I'll turn it over to your Olympian staff. I want to thank Principal Hustlin and Assistant Principal Haynes for for making this video available. One moment, okay, guys?
So the way this is going to work is we are going to give you an extended nutrition break. So we're going to dismiss you in just a minute, very orderly. You'll have